Okay, are you ready? Okay. Right, okay, well, thanks very much for asking me to come and talk to you tonight, Diolch yn fawr. Really, tonight I think is going to be probably a bit of a refresher for everybody. There's a few sort of things that might have come along in the last few years that are sort of different or new, but a lot of it will be quite familiar to you. So hopefully if we get this, hopefully the talk will take me about half an hour, and then hopefully there'll be a bit of room for questions at the end. So just a bit of an outline, bit of a background of the sort of breeding systems that we have, the common ones in Wales and the UK, a little bit about the benefit of hybrid vigour, what are the various options that you have these days. I mean, there's no hard and fast rules, you can just about do anything you like, but there are some common options for replacing breeding flocks. A little bit on the pros and cons of different systems, and then a bit of cost effectiveness in terms of gross margins that you can expect from different strategies. What are the sort of selection tools that you have available to you? I'm really not going to focus too much on breeds because everybody's got their favourite breeds and every breed's got its own merits. But you know, there are a few pointers there as well. And then a little bit about calculating your ewe efficiency figure at the end, because it doesn't matter what the system you are, your flock needs to be fairly efficient in terms of what you do. So again, this is probably nothing new to you, but traditionally the structure of the sheep industry has been to have hill breeds, pure hill breeds in the hills, and obviously they're suited to that environment. They also form an important role, you know, from all sorts of perspectives, such as obviously economic from the farm's point of view, environmental, social, employment, that sort of thing in the countryside. Then at some point, some of these hill ewes, depending on the farm, might get crossed to crossing rams, such as Bluefest Leicester. Perhaps these days, things like Aberfield come into it as well. And then those result in crossbred ewes, which we'll call F1, or the first cross, will comprise most of the commercial flocks in upland and lowland areas. So for example, you've got the various types of mules that you have in different parts of the country, and things like half-breds as well. And then generally speaking, these crossbreds are across the terminal sire rams, such as the Texels, Beltexes, Charolais, Suffolks, and so on. And most of the progeny will go for slaughter, although these days some people keep some of the second cross ewes, especially from more maternal types, for breeding, which helps to reduce your replacement costs slightly. And if you're selling lambs direct to butchers, it can be quite a good sort of selling point that the mother's got a bit better confirmation on her as well. Probably since foot and mouth, I would think in 2001, there's been a trend for more maternal purebreds in self-contained flocks, which have got various advantages, which we'll come on to later on. So obviously things like Cleans and Romneys. These days you've got things like Easy Cares, wool shedding sheep, Aberfield, Highlander, and these sort of breeds as well. There's never been so many breeds. We always had a lot of breeds, but now we've got even more. So just to make it easier for you to decide what to keep. So again, you know, these two diagrams here. One is obviously the land itself, and then on the right hand side you've got what tends to happen in hills and uplands and so on. I think the point really of showing that is that everybody's farm will be different in terms of what your environment is. Some of you will have a vast area of hill land and very little improved. Others might be half and half, or 2/3, 1/3, whatever it is, and that will dictate, you know, what you do on the farm. And if all you've got is a lot of very, very poor quality hill land, you're probably going to be limited in terms of what the breed choices that you have on the farm. But the more improved land you have, then obviously the more options you have in terms of what you do. So again, this has evolved over many years, the stratified system, where you have breeds or crosses matched to the different areas and the terrain and environment that you have. It means that we've developed breeds that are quite specialized in terms of dam breeds and crossbreeding breeds as well. And it does give us a good sort of mix of characteristics for crossing. So for example, you know, your long wool or your crossing breeds are very good in terms of litter size, prolificacy and milk. And then the hill breeds that they cross with are very good for hardiness, and perhaps a sort of a medium body weight as well, which helps to keep things a bit more efficient. And then the stratification system, which is when one is crossed with the other, and I'll come on to that a bit more in a minute, gives us this optimal use of this thing called hybrid vigour or heterosis, which is especially good for maternal traits such as lamb survival and lambs reared and so on. And the first cross that you get from crossing a hill breed with a crossing breed will have very good prolificacy, milk yield, and so on. I said before that some people are now keeping these sort of second crosses to terminal sires, but your maternal traits such as milk yield and quality will generally decline the more crosses you go towards the terminal sire. Now, having said that, I said before, that there are merits sometimes to keeping some of these as replacements, and some terminal sire crosses will actually have very good maternal genetics. So it's important that you're actually aware of what these figures are, because some of them will be very good. And indeed, things like Aberfield, for example, which are quite popular crossing ram these days, is a Texel Bluefaced Leicester cross. If you go back long enough, and then you get even more benefit then from this hybrid vigour when you cross that first cross with a terminal sire, because one is good for the maternal traits and the terminal sire is good for your direct traits or your growth traits. So you get this really good mix of the maternal and the terminal sire genetics coming through, simply based on the fact that this system has evolved over the years. Hybrid vigour, or heterosis, to give it its more technical term, this is what, if you cross two breeds, you'd normally expect the average of the progeny to be somewhere in between the two parents, so depending on what trait you're looking at. But hybrid vigour is the performances over and above that mid-parent mean or average. So you get this sort of slightly better than average performance based on, because it's crossed. It's sort of the opposite in a way to inbreeding depression, which you get if you go too closely bred. And it is generally much higher in maternal traits such as barrenness and lambs weaned and so on, as the figures below show there. And the other thing about it is that where the two breeds that you're crossing are very different, you will get a more marked effect. So for example, when you're crossing a hill breed with a crossing long wool breed, for example, then you will get a better or a higher hybrid vigour percentage or effect than if you were crossing two breeds that were actually quite similar in terms of characteristics and traits. You might get a little bit of hybrid vigour, but it's not going to be as much as if the two breeds are quite different. And that is why the whole stratification of the sheep industry has worked very well over the years, because this hybrid vigour, it doesn't cost anything extra, and it's extra performance for just because of the way that things are done. So again, if you're looking at what are the options, I mean, I said before that that there's any number of options really for replacing sheep flocks. You can do what you like. There's lots of different sheep systems out there, but for a standard breeding flock that would be in a sort of regular age structure, then the options are generally, obviously, if you're a hill breed, you will be breeding your own replacements generally, and depending on the farm that you have, you will be able to crossbreed a certain proportion of them. So what I'm talking about now is the sort of upland or lowland flocks that are sourcing replacements in some way. So probably the easiest option is the traditional option, which is to buy these first cross replacements as ewe lambs or shearlings. You can also, as I've said before, you can do that, but keep some of your sort of terminal sire or second cross ewe lambs as well. This might be a way of improving conformation or reducing replacement costs and so on. It depends on the cost of the value of lambs and the cost of replacements every year as well. If you have a farm that's got some hill land and some better quality land, you could have a stratified system all in one system on your own farm. You'll have two flocks. You'll have a hill flock and a crossbred flock on your own farm, and the proportion that you have them in will depend on your farm and what proportion of hill ground and improved land that you have. Like I said before, the purebred flock has become more popular in recent years for all sorts of reasons, which I'll come on to, where you either have a pure maternal breed such as Culline, Romney, these sort of things, or perhaps you're using two or more of these maternal breeds in rotation. So one cross will be put to Culline, and then perhaps the next time that resultant ewe will be put to an Aberfield or a Highlander or whatever. There's lots of these farms operating these sort of systems these days. Another option there at the bottom there, which I think is people will be doing this, and that is to just probably get the best of both worlds. You're getting the benefits of the maternal genetics, but instead of breeding your own, you will just be buying in replacements from somebody else. So you're relying on somebody else to do the recording, to do to have the health status and the maternal genetics that you want, and it actually keeps it nice and simple. It's almost as simple as the traditional stratified system of buying in replacements. And I'm sure some people will do that. And I often think that for flocks that are perhaps 200, 300, 400 ewes in size, you're trying to do everything by breeding your own replacements. So it's a nice simple system to perhaps find a regular source of replacements, somebody who you trust, who's breeding sheep, just like you want them to a good health status, using performance recorded and so on. And it perhaps will be just as easy to actually buy in your replacements and cross all of the ewes in your flock to fairly easy lambing rams. So I think that this table here won't be very surprising to you, but so the first column there is the buying in route, and then the second column is the homebred route. So the replacement costs will depend, obviously, the answer in both columns is exactly the same there. It depends on the market price for lambs and breeding ewes, and that will vary from year to year. So instead of selling all your lambs in the second option, you'll be keeping some of them as replacements. So while you're losing out in terms of lamb income, you're gaining because you're not having to buy in replacements. So the actual difference in cost between the two systems will depend on the value of lambs and the cost of breeding stock every year. When it comes to things like the control of being in control of genetics, it's obviously going to be better if you're breeding your own replacements. You are in control. You decide which ewes to keep, which rams to use to breed your replacements from, and so on. If you're buying in your replacements, then unless you know who you're buying the sheep from and you know what their breeding goals are, then you haven't got that control. I think things are getting better in terms of there is more conversation between farms in terms of the stock they're buying and the farms they're buying from, because things like health status are becoming more important, as well as genetics for producing sheep that are fairly easy to keep and perform well on grass, for example. If you're breeding your own replacements, you may need some extra land to keep the extra age group of stock on your farm. If you're buying them in, then you can buy them in at whatever age you want, as ewe lambs or shearlings, depending on what your policy is. So you may not need the extra land to keep them on for that extra year. The health status, I think, is quite an important one these days. A lot of vets are very, very keen on closed flocks because of the risk of bringing in infectious disease. There's obviously things like abortions, enzootic abortion, and so on. But perhaps the ones that are becoming more and more in vogue in recent years are what we call these iceberg diseases, which are things like Mediavisna, Johne's disease, OPA, which is also known as Yagsikti, which are sort of wasting diseases, and they can really drag the performance of your flock down. And obviously, if you're buying in stock from unknown sources, then of varying health statuses, some will be good and others may not be so good, then obviously there is a higher risk there.
Sorry, I think we're having some technical issues with Rudian. I think it's frozen, but we'll just try and get hold of him if we can. I think because of the wind and the rain, it's quite difficult. Are you back with us, Rudian? I think we lost you for a second there.
All right, okay.
So if you'd like to just repeat maybe the last section you discussed, that would be great.
Did you hear any of this slide?
Yes, we heard about the closed block policy. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's fine. Yes, sorry, I didn't go any further. I was trying to advance my slides, but it seemed to have locked up. But anyways, back working now. Yeah. So other considerations, obviously, in terms of your policy, would be, you know, what are the costs of buying in your replacement animals every year, whether there is potential to sell surplus females that you don't want for yourself or don't need for yourself, or even some breeding rams if you're breeding purebred stock. There's always a chance to perhaps add a bit of value to what you're selling by doing that. What's your current situation? You know, are you actually on the cusp of needing to make a change? You know, is your current performance, you know, is your current system needing to be fine-tuned or changed because of flock health issues? You know, have you been screening for these iceberg diseases and so on? Is your labor or resources like buildings, are they needing to be looked at? So and perhaps you need to move forward with a sort of slightly easier managed flock, and at the same time, you know, perhaps changing system to later lambing. You know, if your buildings are coming to the end of their life and they're not really going to be quite expensive to replace, if you're lambing inside, then perhaps lambing later at grass, doing things like grass wintering. It might also premeditate a change of breed or a change of replacement policy, because when you're breeding your own replacements, you can breed for animals that are better suited to these sort of grass-based systems. I'm not saying that your traditional sheep aren't suitable for them. In my experience, most sheep will work up with them, but it's probably slightly better if you can breed your own replacement and breed sheep that are suited to that sort of system. And you know, if you want to start breeding your own replacements, do you have the land? Do you have the skills and the ability to keep records to make things a bit more quantifiable as well? So there's a few other considerations there. Now, when it comes to looking at financial comparisons, again, you know, you can make figures, gross margins, suit whatever you want, really. So I've chosen two examples really for this. One is the current SAC Farm Management Handbook, which is now freely available on that link. So you can have a look at it yourself. And a few years ago, this is actually when I used to work for SAC, we actually changed the systems in the handbook so that more modern systems like purebred maternal flocks were actually included. They never used to be. So we have changed things around slightly. Now, I don't have any involvement in this any longer, but back then we made the changes that we had to. So and we've looked here at this is gross margin. Obviously, it's no further than gross margin level, and looking at three different performance levels at three different lambing percentages of 150, 160, and 170%. So, and this is gross margin per head budgeted. And as you can see, the purebred flock does win each time. It's roughly about 15% higher. Now, obviously, like I said before, your purebred flocks or maternal flocks tend to lend themselves more for later lambing at grass as well. So the thing is that the other thing to consider is that possibly your fixed cost structure might also change if you're changing system from crossbred to purebred. So, you know, it's going to be different for every farm. So you need to look at the figures for your own farm. And just to show, I've shared this presentation with Farming Connect, so hopefully you'll be able to access it as well, that the actual data that I've used are there in full on this page and the next page. So you can actually see how these figures are made up, because there's so many lambs at so much pounds per head for each system. And obviously in the case of the crossbred ewes, you've got purchased gimmers there, whereas in the crossbred ewes, you have less lamb sales, but you don't have the purchase cost. So, you know, and everything else is going to be relative to that as well. So you can have a look at these figures, and the thing to do, I suppose, is to actually look at what the figures are on your own farm, rather than looking at just standard figures like that. The other example that I've taken is one that I did for a farm in north of England, probably about 6 or 7 years ago, and can you still hear me? Yeah. This was a farm that at the time had about 600 hill ewes and about 900 crossbred ewes, and had their own stratified system on the farm. And he wanted to know what would the effect be if he changed to all crossbred ewes, buying in all his replacements, or changing to a purebred flock with all the replacements homebred. So I did a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of calculations, and obviously this was a few years ago now, so I'm not going to share the actual values with you. But in terms of an index basis, if you take the middle option, which is all replacements are bought in, as an index of 100, then you can see the effect that would have had. And you know, this is a fairly in-depth look at these three systems, trying to minimize any sort of variables as much as I could. But I think that figure there of 115 versus 100, and that's an index. It's not a pounds per head, it's an index. Actually, probably correlates fairly well with those figures there in the farm management handbook, when the purebred flock is about 15% higher than the crossbred flock. So that's something. But like I said, you know, it depends on what the balance of that particular farm had. The right sort of farm where he had 600 hill ewes and 900 crossbred ewes, your farm might be different in terms of what proportion of good quality land and poorer hill ground that you have. So you need to do these calculations for your own farm. Okay, so in terms of moving on slightly, in terms of well, you know, if you are buying in your replacements, what is the sort of best practice? What's the sort of recommendations that we would say? Well, first of all, you know, are you buying ewe lambs or shearlings? If you're buying ewe lambs, they'll be cheaper. You may be buying well-grown ewe lambs that you can put to the ram and lamb as ewe lambs. If you're buying shearlings or gimmers, then obviously they will cost you more, but you can put them to the ram straight away. So there's various options there. Obviously, you could buy smaller, cheaper ewe lambs, but then and not put them to the ram, but have to run them on for a whole year, before you put them to the ram and get any return from them. So everyone's going to be slightly different in terms of their preferences. Again, ideally, in an ideal world, and I know it's not an ideal world, but you would source your replacements directly from farms of known health status that are ideally also using performance recorded rams. Now, the chances of you getting all these things lined up is probably not going to be that high. A lot of breeding stock are sourced from markets, which is fine. I mean, markets form a very important role. And there's probably things that you can do, though, if you are buying from the market, and that is to perhaps buy from flocks that you bought from before, that you've had good results with, no problems, that you know the health status from, that you've got a relationship with the seller, and so on. And like I said, buy from breeding society sales from flocks of known health status, and again, ideally that are screening for these iceberg diseases, because over time, these iceberg diseases, and they are becoming more and more prevalent, or if not more prevalent, there's more knowledge of them, there's more testing for them, and quite often I find flocks, and this is not just crossbred flocks, it can be purebred flocks as well, where performance is declining over time, when all other management practices are fine, then you need to be looking at these things, because they can really severely deplete your flock performance, especially things like lambing percentage, lambs reared, lamb survival, and so on. Quite a large flock that I deal with on a fairly regular basis a few years ago, and they were actually a mixed flock in terms of they would buy in some, but they were breeding a lot of their own replacements as well, and were largely closed in more recent years. And they found, this is back in 2015, that they had a severe Medivisna problem on that farm, and so it cost a lot of money to test and cull and replace and so on. So it's best to be aware of these things, not to sort of hide your head in the sand, if you like, and pretend that they're not there, because they are out there. And then if you're buying in replacements, it's probably, even though some of these vaccines are now getting quite expensive, it's probably a good practice to vaccinate your flock for infectious abortions such as toxoplasma and enzootic abortion, because the cost of an outbreak can be quite horrendous. And even though the vaccines are expensive on a per head basis, it's probably good practice to do that. Now, just last week, this is interesting, because just last week in the Farmers Weekly, some of you might have seen, there was an article by Michael Priestley that the mules are fighting back. Obviously, the mules have lost ground in recent years to the maternal breeds, but they are starting to recognise that this needs addressing, because obviously things like I said before, the vets are calling for high health status, again, iceberg disease and so on, and obviously the advance of the maternal breeds probably in the last 15-20 years has been steadily increasing year on year. And at the end of the day, the hybrid vigour that we mentioned at the start that you get from having a crossbred flock is a very useful advantage to have, and you can get very good production potential from mules, and we're never going to not have them, but they have been losing ground a bit. So it's nice to see that some farmers are, and I think they've set up a mule group or something. So I think it's quite nice that they're fighting back, because there's no doubt that these can be really good productive sheep that still suit a lot of farms. Having a system where you're buying in replacements and crossing all your ewes to a terminal sire and selling all the lambs is a nice simple system that suits an awful lot of people. But like I said, they've seen that they need to act on the demand, perhaps a more performance recording, more data collection. Obviously health status is very important, and probably as important as anything, that farms are moving to more sort of grass-based systems where the sheep need to be bred on forage rather than having been fed a lot of concentrates and being dressed to look pretty for a sale. Commercial farms aren't really interested in that, how they look. It's how they perform that's increasingly becoming more and more important. I love this slide. It's an example with Scottish blackface sheep, but it's just to show the advantage of performance recording, and this is just in lamb grading, if you like. So this is a farm that started recording probably 25 years ago, and in the first 10 years, or within 10 years, then they'd increased their lamb carcass weights, and this is in pure black-faced sheep, from 15.5 kilos to just over 18 kilos, and improved the grades, hugely as well. So the value per lamb is greatly increased, and that's just in the carcass traits. To say nothing about the maternal traits, that they would have gained a lot as well. So I really like showing that particular slide, because I don't think it matters whether you are in one camp or the other in terms of maternal or crossbred. Recording your sheep can have great benefits there. Okay, so we'll perhaps concentrate a bit on the homebred replacement line for now. So if you decided that you want to start breeding your own replacements, what do? Do you start with what you have, or do you just replace the whole lot? And how quickly do you do that? Well, there's probably merit in both systems. Obviously, the economics of it will generally dictate what you do, because if you decide to replace your current flock entirely in 1 year, it's probably going to cost you a lot of money, because you're probably selling your existing flock at a bit of a disadvantage, and you're probably going to be paying over the odds for replacement. So it's going to be a gradual process, perhaps. But if you start breeding from what you've got, it's going to take you longer to get to where your end point, but your sheep will be bred in your environment and your farm with the conditions and disease challenges that you have on your farm. So I suppose the thing to do would be to perhaps choose some proven or perhaps older sheep that have been bred, that have bred well on your farm, that haven't had any issues in terms of lambing problems, lameness, any other problems that you don't want. If you can identify some of these ewes that have done really well for you, they would be my choice to actually start breeding replacements from. So you decide on what breed you want to cross them with. And like I said, there's a multitude available on the market these days. Decide on what your strategy is going to be, and then you choose the right ewes that are going to give you decent quality replacements. And the further you go down the line of retaining your own replacements, eventually you won't need to breed from your current breed after 2 or 3 years or whatever. Once you've got enough replacement of the right genetics coming through. If you decide to replace your current flock, and breed substitution is a genetic improvement strategy. You substitute your current breed for another one, and like I said before, if you do it all at once, it's probably going to cost you quite a bit of money, but it will get you to where you want to be quicker, which may have advantages as well. But the other thing to bear in mind is that if you're buying in maternal stock, buying in rams is one thing, but if you're buying in females, then your foundation stock will generally be someone else's second best, because they will be surplus to somebody else's requirements. Now, I think that issue is probably becoming less and less of an issue, because more and more farmers are doing this sort of thing now, and there seems to be a lot more choice. But you do need to be careful about where you're buying in your foundation stock from. And the other thing, and this is probably the most important point really, is that most farms that I've dealt with over the years who have started breeding their own replacements, they will say that they only make progress when they are breeding replacements on their own farm, so that they're in control of culling for problems that they don't want on the farm. So I'll cover that a bit more later on. So it might take a few years. You're not going to get to where you want to be overnight, or even within 1 or 2 years. It might take 3 or 4 years to actually start seeing some progress once you change system. Okay, how are we doing for time? Yeah, okay. Again, a few tips if you're breeding your own replacement. I've got on the next slide, I'm going to show you a bit of a lambing score sheet to select your ewe lamb replacements, or identify some selection as early as possible. Make use of things like EID. You have to have EID tags in your stock, so make use of that if you're breeding your own replacements. Keep as much data as you need. I'm not going to say record absolutely everything, because these days you can probably record a load of stuff that probably half of it is not going to be that useful or cost effective to do so. So decide what information is important for you to keep, and keep that information. Probably once you go down the line a bit, you will be splitting your flock into an A flock and a B flock. So your A flock is for breeding your replacements from, and your B flock will be crossed, and you will not keep replacements from the B flock, and eventually they will be culled. Try to buy recorded tups with good maternal EBV figures. We usually recommend that. Again, once you go a few years down the line, one thing that a few guys that I know are doing is breeding the replacements out of older sheep that are proven in the system. So it means these are sheep that have perhaps had a couple of lamb crops bred to an easy lambing terminal sire that they've had no problems with, and they don't need any handling other than for routine flock treatments. And these would be proven sheep in your system on your farm, and they're probably well matched to that system, so it's a good idea to perhaps breed from them. The other thing is that identify any sheep that give you any problems at the time that they do. because if you don't identify them at the time, then by 3-4 months later, when you're choosing your ewes to go to the ram the next year, then they probably look quite good. They've had a good summer at grass, and you'll put them back to the tup again and get the same problems again. So a set of ear notches perhaps is the easiest thing to do. So any or a spray marker, whatever it is, then identify any sheep that give you problems when they give you problems, and then there'll be no hiding place for them later on in the year when they're coming up that race. So this is the lambing score. This, I think, John Vipond, actually, I used to work with at SAC. I think he probably developed this, actually, and it's also in a HTV booklet that you can get online. And basically, you're scoring for 3 things at lambing time. And you can do this, in the field, in the shed, or whatever. And obviously, the 3 traits are lambing ease, so whether the lamb is assisted or not, or a little bit help. The mothering ability of the ewe, so whether she leaves the lambs or just is a very good mother and follows whatever. And then the vigour of the lamb as well. So some of this is maternal, and some of this comes from the ram side of it as well. So, so whether the lamb has to be sucked or whether it's up and suckling and you don't need to touch them. So obviously, if you have all 3 down the right-hand column, those are the ewe lambs that you want to keep as replacements. Obviously, the higher the score, the better. And obviously, as you get more and more selective, as you go down the line of breeding your own replacements, you may need to adjust your thresholds in terms of what you're looking for. So culling, I think I said this before, people who breed their own replacements will find that culling is probably one of the best management tools that they have in terms of making progress in these traits that you want in your homebred flock. You can make a lot more progress probably quicker by culling for these issues rather than selecting for traits in a recording system. So you either identify ewes that give you problems, like I said before, and cull them, or you just don't use them for replacements. One or the other. It depends on the value of cull animals and so on, I suppose. So as well as the lambing issues that I've mentioned in the previous slide, you want to look for things like repeated lameness, excessive need to dag sheep, dirty backsides that are not desirable. Use up prolapse. If they prolapse once, there's a very good chance it will do so again. Ewes that get stuck on their back will tend to do that again. Obviously, things like mastitis, you don't want that anyway, but even things like poor udder and teat conformation, it can all help that lamb to find the teat and get off to a good start. So have a look for things like that. Ewes that don't rear very good lambs, which might signify that they are their milk yield's not so good. And then the final point, I mean, you may have other issues as well that you would want to cull for, but the last one I've got there is that any ewe that is in a poorer condition than her flock mates for no apparent reason. Okay, some ewes might be leaner than others because they've reared twins or triplets, but if a sheep is lean for no reason, whereas other ewes around her are gaining condition, then there may be a problem with that sheep cannot cope with your system, or there may be a disease issue that you need to cull out of the flock. So, like I said, there's probably lots of other things you could be culling for as well. But culling is a useful management tool. Just sort of a slight aside, although it's all interlinked, I suppose, that the AHDB Challenge Sheep Project, which has got about 15 focus farms in England, has probably highlighted, but if not highlighted, but also sort of confirmed what we sort of knew about ewe lambs and the lifetime performance of sheep. Not everybody wants to lamb ewe lambs because it can be a lot of work, but they found that you get better returns in terms of lifetime production from your flock from selling well-grown ewe lambs than if you select from those born as multiples. And selecting replacements from ones that are born as twins or triplets, or twins especially, is quite a common practice. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but it is a relatively low heritability trait. And the research suggests that if you select from well-grown ewe lambs, you'd be better off than purely selecting on terms of litter size that the lamb came from. And that's something that Trevor Cook, who's a well-known advisor as well, has advocated. Again, if you are tupping your ewe lambs to lamb, then use easy lambing rams. Leave one lamb on the ewe lamb only, perhaps wean earlier. Give them a chance to express their growth potential, and they will repay you for that in future, sort of thing. If you're not lambing ewe lambs, and like I said, it's not everybody's cup of tea to lamb a lot of ewe lambs, but you still need to select well-grown ewe lambs. And there's one or two people that I know that actually even run their ewe lambs that they've selected with a raddle teaser to identify those that are actually cycling and are likely to be more fertile in future. So it's perhaps not something that everybody would do, but if it's another option to do that. You don't want to fall into the trap of selling your best ewe lambs early on because the price is high. You need to be selecting these ewe lambs fairly early on, identifying those ones that are doing well, that haven't given you any hassle at birth and all these sort of things as early as you can. And if you've sold them all because the price was good early in the season, then what you're left with may not be the best ones to keep. And this is a quote from a farmer that I know in the Borders, Giles Henry, who's a very progressive farmer, and his quote, and it was the same for cows as it is with sheep, is that the first opportunity to choose replacements is when they're born. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about the lambing scores and so on, identifying them at that stage in terms of if they give you any trouble. Okay, this is just a little. This is just a bit of data from the AHDB Challenge Sheep Project, and this is for flocks who are breeding from ewe lambs, and it shows the difference there that if you meet these target weights, if you are lambing your ewe lambs, they need to be at least 60% of their mature body size at tupping, and if they're not, then the weaning weights will be significantly down. And in this case, for example, we just take the top one into account there, that if they are above target weight at tupping, then the total weight of lambs at weaning was 31 kilos, whereas if they were below, the average was down to about 18 kilos. So there's a huge difference there. And they found this was the same when they took the weights at scanning and the 8-week weight of the ewe lamb as well. So, it pays to keep these well-grown ewe lambs. Whether you're breeding from them or not, they are the future of your flock. And again, this is probably, I'm not going to dwell on this, but this is probably quite a well-known graph in terms of the growth patterns that you need. If you're lambing, mating ewe lambs, they need to be 60% of their body weight. If you're lambing gimmers, they need to be 80%, and then by the time they get to that third mating, they'll be at their mature size, whatever that is for your breed. Okay, I think we're coming to the end now. Again, I'm not going to dwell too much on breeds because everybody has their I've mentioned a few tonight, but everybody has their own favorite breeds, and if they worked for you before, that's absolutely fine. You also need to consider what you're selling. How does the breed that you have, does it suit your markets, your chosen market, or the local market that you sell through? If you're selling a lot of store lambs, perhaps you need to have nice, tight-skinned, white-faced lambs. They might sell better as a store lamb. Probably bears very little resemblance to performance, but if that is your policy, your marketing policy, they need to suit that. So there's all these things that need to be looked at as well. There was a study that SAC did probably about 2005, so it's like 15 years ago now. And they did it with Suffolks and black-faced rams, looking at the assisted lambings that were needed. And they found that there was as much variation within breeds as there was between the breeds. So for example, the Suffolks, I think they found that the best ram individual ram had 8% assisted lambings, and the worst one was 55% of his lambs needed assisting. And even with black-faced sheep, which you'd expect to be a bit easier than a Suffolk, the best ram still had 5% of his progeny needed assistance, and the worst one was about 37-38%. So there is a lot of within breed variation as there is between breeds. So, you know, bear that in mind. They do need to be suited to your environment, your farm, your situation, and your choice should be based on economic reality rather than any sort of sentimental reality that you might have based on what's happened in the past. Things do change, you know, and you need to be prepared to move with the times. And certainly there's been a lot of change in sheep farming in the last 10, 15 years. And I can see that continuing, especially in light of things like Brexit as well. There's room for a whole range of different systems, but we do need to be prepared to change if we have to. Such as I was saying earlier about the mule breeders that are in the Farmers Weekly last week. You know, they've seen that the threat coming from the maternal breeds, and they recognise they need to change to meet that challenge. And like I said, you know, we've always had a lot of sheep breeds in the UK, and we still have them, and there's more and more coming seemingly all the time. But most of the choices that we will have on a large scale, commercial scale, will be limited to the main breeds, the main hill breeds, the main crossing breeds, and some of them newer maternal breeds as well. There's room for everybody to have their own local breeds and rare breeds and for showing and all that sort of thing. But from a commercial point of view, you know, the breeds need to be moving with the times and providing what the market wants. And just to finish off, there's a ewe efficiency measure which I quite like. It's not everything, but it's I think it's quite a good measure of efficiency in terms of how much a ewe produces in relation to her own body weight. And so it's obviously it's linked to the number of lambs that she rears or weans, and the weight and growth rate of those lambs. So those are the two big things there, obviously, and they make a huge impact on the performance of a flock. So, you know, lambing percentage and lamb growth rate, I think those two things are very key performance indicators in a sheep flock. So you work out how many kilos a ewe has reared based on, you know, 1.5 lambs at 40 kilos, for example, is 60 kilos, and divide that by her body weight at mating, and that will give you a percentage or a ratio. And the closer you get to 100%, then that's the ideal figure, because then she will have reared her own body weight in lambs in that season. So, you know, and it does reflect the efficiency of things like lower maintenance costs of smaller ewes. That's still providing a good lamb at the end of it. And like I said before, good rearing percentage and lamb growth rate, which are very good KPIs. If you're doing this as a weaning target, it's going to be lower than the total number of lambs reared, but probably anything over 70% is going to be classed as very, very good or excellent. But it won't be as high as perhaps 100% to weaning. That would be more to the end of the season to a rearing figure. So I think that, Gwen, is my last slide. It was, yes. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Rudyard. We've got a few questions that have come in. I'd like to say that the webinar has been recorded, so if anybody wants to catch up or see the figures again, it will be available on the Farming Connect website for people to review again. So the questions that we have, let me see. So I have been keeping ewe lambs from crossing arbor fields with speckles F1, looking to possibly end the speckles and keeping replacements from F1 and only using material rams. Would this be sustainable for replacements?
Yeah, I think I explained that you know, you've obviously taken that first step in crossing your speckled ewes with a maternal breed like an Aberfield. So what you need to decide, and perhaps you can do this in conjunction with talking in a discussion group or amongst other sources of information such as Farming Connect and Innovis and these sort of people in terms of what might be the next best breed to cross those first crosses with. And you know, there's a number of options there available. If you feel that if your farm is predominantly hill land versus improved, then you may still need to retain some of the hardiness of the speckle in there. So you know, you can always, down the line, you can always perhaps put a bit of speckle back in if you have to, or any other breed for that matter that'd be perhaps more of a hill breed. So you know, it does depend on exactly what your farm type is like. But yes, I think that should be a good sustainable system. And even if you've got hill land, you know, you can manage hills slightly differently these days. You know, in the old days, you know, it does depend on how extensive your hill is. If it's very extensive and it's open hill, then you will perhaps need to have hefted stock on there if it's not fenced. But if it is manageable, you could run, you know, use with singles or replacement stock on the hill, and keep the most productive land for use with twins or younger sheep. So, you know, every farm is going to be slightly different, but I think that's probably a good start that you've made crossing your speckles with an Amberfield. Yeah.
Okay. The next question is it beneficial, well, financially beneficial, keeping ewe lambs empty, or should we tuck them? It's obviously that they pay their way, or if so, how do you ensure you get them to twin as two tough?
Yeah, it's largely a personal choice. I mean, some people, they know that lambing ewe lambs is a good idea on paper, but they've tried it and they don't like it because it's a lot of extra work at the end of lambing when you've probably got other things you want to be doing. So the figures seem to suggest that if you can get your ewe lambs to rear a lamb, then that will pay for that ewe lamb's keep for that year and perhaps a bit extra. As long as you make sure that it's an easy lambing lamb, perhaps you wean them early and all these sort of things that I mentioned before. If you don't tup your ewe lambs, then probably you can probably relax a little bit in terms of how you manage them, because you don't want them to be getting too big and fat before they go to the ram as shearlings. So you know, the New Zealanders will always tell you that the replacement stock is the highest priority stock of animals on the farm, and I would agree with that completely. But if you're not putting them to the ram, then you've got as an opportunity there to perhaps grow them a bit more gradually, not let them get too fat, perhaps use them as followers to other classes of stock in a grazing system, but still meet that 80% for a best part of a year. That shouldn't be difficult, even on fairly extensive grazing. And you should, as long as you don't, you know, let them spoil them, let them get too big and fat, then you should still get reasonable scanning, you know, conception rates and scanning percentages as shearlings. There was something else I was going to say which I've slipped my mind. It might come back to me, but yeah.
Okay. And also, so if it's a closed flock, so obviously you're not purchasing any ewe lambs in, but obviously you're purchasing rams in, should you still be using abortion vaccinations like Enzo and Exo? So should you still be doing that if you've got a closed
well,
flock?
I think, you know, there is probably the sort of pass the buck answer is discuss it with your vet, because that's probably in terms of what your situation is. I think these are very successful vaccines from what I understand, and if you have any sort of issues, I mean, things like toxo is something that you can have regardless of whether you breed your own replacements or not. You know, it depends on wildlife and cats and rats and these sort of things. So that's probably, but it is quite an expensive vaccine at the moment. But for things like your enzootic abortion vaccine, I would probably discuss it with your vet. I mean, you might be okay. but there's always a risk that your flock could be, you know, naive and you could bring it in so from somewhere, or it could come in somewhere. So I think definitely if you're buying in replacements, it's a good policy. If you're closed flock, then it's probably less risky, but you still need to discuss it with your vet as part of your health plan.
Okay. What's the rule of thumb, knowing the numbers of ewe lambs you should keep on every year? So what's the rule of thumb that we should follow?
Yeah. Well, this is interesting because normally when you tup ewe lambs, and I'm assuming now this is in a breeding your own replacement scenario. Okay. Normally when you tup ewe lambs, then you will expect to get about 20% of them scan empty. Okay. So one solution, if you've got the choice, is to keep 20% more than you need in lamb. And this depends on your size of your flock, how many you've got available, these sort of things. But a farm that's close to me here, a few years ago, and there was a big flock. This was a flock of 2,000 sheep, and they were maternal purebred flock, and they wanted about 400 plus ewe lambs a year as replacements, and every year they had 320 or so would get in lamb. And I said, well, you know, if you kept 450, 480, then you might get your 400 in lamb. So, you know, keep more than you need, and then the ones that don't get in lamb, you can sell them in the sort of rising market in sort of February, March time, when they will generally be worth a fair bit of money in recent years anyway. And you will then end up with the ones that do get in lamb, you will automatically be left with more fertile breeding stock in your flock. They may not be the biggest ones, but they'll be the ones that are in lamb. So it's you know, that's one strategy of doing that. You still need to make sure though that the ones you keep are the well-grown ones. You don't want to be keeping extra ones just because just to get the numbers up. They still need to be you know, 60% of them potentially mature size, which is probably going to be about 40 kilos or thereabouts, 40, 42 kilos by tupping time. So you mustn't skimp on that guideline, but perhaps keeping extra ones and selling the ones that don't get in lamb later on is one strategy that you could try.
Okay, we have a final question. It is a long one, I do apologise. We are an upland hill farm, generally crossing our homebred ewes with Texel or Cheviot rams and crossing our shearlings with Welsh Llyn rams for easier lambing. Would it be better crossing the shearlings with more of a terminal sire and sell their lambs and therefore put the Welsh ram back to our older ewes to produce a hardier replacement?
Yeah, it seems like what you're doing is almost opposite of the traditional stratified system, where your hill breed would be the ones that you would be crossing with a breed to get replacements from. I mean, every farm is different. I know they did a study. I almost had a slide actually that I put in, but I didn't in the end, of this study that I think they did at Pushpayran about 10 years ago, where they were crossing Welsh ewes with different breeds. And I wish I'd put it in now, but you know, every farm is different in terms of what works for you. But I would suggest that probably breeding a replacement from well-proven older hill sheep that haven't, you know, crossing them to a suitable crossing breed will then give you the better maternal traits for then putting to a terminal sire as ewes further down the line. Yeah. So that was a long-winded answer as well.
Sorry, hopefully you all heard me. I was just thanking Rujan for this evening and just saying that it has been recorded. Therefore, if you want to catch up on it, it's available on the Farming Connect website. Also, if you'd like to speak to Rujan Jones on this topic, please contact your local development officer and we can pass on some information. So, diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much, Rujan Jones, for your time this evening. Diolch yn fawr. Nos da. Good night.